We're here with Alan Pierson. Maestro Pierson is the music director of New Music Rockstar Chamber Orchestra, Alarm Will Sound. He can neither confirm nor deny any connection to any upcoming vacancies at prominent New York cultural institutions. Alan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Dave. Nice to be here again.
Sorry if that was a little uncomfortable innuendo there. So we wanted to have you on the show, first of all, because you're a great person to talk to, and we enjoyed talking to you before. But a couple of weeks ago, you premiered the first of a series of projects, of collaborations with Alarm Will Sound called Alarm System.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a little bit on the show when it was first announced, but for anybody that's not familiar with it, could you maybe tell us a little bit about what Alarm System is?
Yeah, so Alarm System is about trying to expand the circle of the kinds of artists that can create great music for Alarm Will Sound, and in principle, eventually, I hope for other groups like us. And so it's a deliberately open-ended kind of collaboration, and so we're collaborating with all different kinds of artists, musical artists, but people who don't do their primary work, notating stuff for groups like ours. And so it's a deliberately open-ended collaboration in which we work with each artist to figure out what's a process by which you can take your work, which we already love, and bring it to Alarm Will Sound and create something that is of yourself for Alarm Will Sound and with Alarm Will Sound.
So to me, this is a really interesting problem that we, as people that make notated music, have tried to solve for a long time, is how to make the things that we do relevant to a group of people that are basically completely unaware of this or seemingly unrelated to it. And it seems like there are various levels of success, and I wonder, at the risk of turning it into like a graduate seminar, how do you concern yourself with issues of like authenticity when you're working with these people across this other genre? It seems to me like you could easily slide off into, John Coltrane with strings.
Right. Well, first of all, I think the first answer to that is the kind of artist that we choose. We're really careful with who we invite to be part of the program, and it's three artists a year. We're just finishing our first year now, and in the midst of planning our second. And we're really careful with who we invite to be a part of it. And somebody whose main kind of creativity and artistic awesomeness is expressed through like a great tune or even like fantastic improvisation is probably may not be like the best artist for Alarm System because we don't want to do John Coltrane with strings. We want to find people whose work we think is exciting in a way that would translate to Alarm Will Sound. And someone, we look for people who we think have great ideas that, want this vehicle and that would be enhanced by, or at least, people for whom having a group like Alarm Will Sound to work with would be like opening a new door and, would be a kind of kid in a candy shop experience where suddenly like they can do all this stuff that comes out of work that they're doing, but that is going to be different from stuff they've done before. So I think that's the best answer that I have for that. But then also like the nature of the collaborative process is really important. I think one of the really hard things with there is this kind of culture gap that you alluded to between Alarm Will Sound. While we have people in the group that play all different kinds of music, and we have professional jazz musicians in the group, for instance, and that's crucial, I think, to our being able to bridge, to make these connections. But fundamentally, we're a group that works with notation, and pretty much all the artists we're working with are artists who don't primarily work with notation. So there is, that's I think the main sort of river that has to be crossed, and the bridge that has to be made, and it's very much on both sides. So that it's a good challenge for us to sort of break out of that and work in a less notationally oriented way, I think, and to be more connected to, what is music? What's the musical idea? What are the sounds we're going for? And, then also to help, interface with the artists we're working with so that their ideas, when necessary, can be more conveyed through notation. So that's kind of the dance of Alarm System. And it's different, it's very much, and very deliberately different with each artist we work with.
So speaking of the artists that you're working with, you've got 3 for this season that you mentioned, and the one that I was describing recently that was premiered at the University of Colorado recently was your collaboration with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, and also on the list, and I'm going to butcher this name, Valgir Sigurdsson. Is that anything close to right?
That's Valgir. I know the first name I can do, Valgir. It's Sigurdsson or something. The second name I'm still working on.
The D with the slash.
Yeah, that's a tough name.
And then Adult
that's
Fur.
where I advanced.
So
Adult Fur, otherwise known as Ryan McNeely. Wait, hold on. My dog is scratching at the door and crying. 1 second.
Oh no.
Part of the interview. Hi, ZC. Come on in.
Pets are welcome on Sound Notion, by the way.
Good. Well, here, she has a lot to contribute.
I would be shocked if she didn't. So I feel like probably Medeski, Martin, and Wood are the at least for me and for the people that I know of these 3 people, the one that people are most likely to know the music of already.
Yeah, right. Although Valgir's done a ton, and I mean Valgir's probably most. He probably is most famous as a guy who's produced a bunch of stuff for Bjork. So you've probably heard his work, even if you may not know you've heard it. Okay. But he's also a composer. I mean, I actually, unlike the other artists we're working with, Valgir actually has experience already doing work for chamber orchestra. I mean, Valgir actually does write scores. And another group that I work with is the Crash Ensemble. And Valgir just straight up wrote Crash Ensemble a piece, done himself. So Valgir is a little different from the others in that he, in a way, at least on the surface, might not seem like he needs a project like Alarm System because he already is writing stuff for large ensembles and orchestras.
I mean, his work on his work with Sam Amidon on All Is Well, I think might have been one of the first times I'd heard something like that done.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful project, yeah.
And just I mean, wonderful bassoon with old-time vocals. It's
that's gorgeous. Yeah, right, of course, and Valgir also is founder, and I believe, I may be getting the title wrong, but he's the director, or at least the leader, or a leader of Bedroom Community, the record label that's done a bunch of stuff with Sam and with Nico Muley.
Nice.
Among others.
Yeah, I'll be particularly interested to hear how that collaboration goes.
Yeah, that's been fun. And the way, so as I said, they've all been progressing differently. Valgir has been working with one of Alarm Sound's percussionists, Chris Thompson, very closely, and he brought us a bunch of electronic work. So Valgir actually, Valgir does most of his work electronically. And so Valgir created a set of electronic tracks for us that then Chris developed some ideas about how to translate to our instruments. And there were some sort of mini workshops where Chris would work with people in Alarm Sound on how to create the sounds that were on Valgir's track. And then Chris notated out a score, and that culminated in a workshop where Valgir came. We had a score that Chris had written out, which Valgir had already seen, and we did a reading of that with Valgir there, and Valgir sort of worked with the players, and that was phase 1, and then the 2 of them together have gone off with that score and with the notes from that first workshop, and have been revamping and improving and deepening, what's written.
Yeah, and it sounds like a process you're not unfamiliar with. I know the Aphex Twin album of yours.
Right, totally. And that really was, a kind of starting point of Alarm System was, that we had this really cool experience doing the Aphex Twin project. But in a way, it was, it wasn't a collaborative project because while Richard D. James, was aware of what we were doing and supportive of what we were doing, he wasn't involved in it. We loved his stuff and took it and ran with it. So a starting point for Alarm System was that experience, and also, a sense that there were all these things like this happening in the world. There are lots of projects now that you see that involve artists from outside of the classical world working with classical musicians. And we began by asking ourselves, and we love to see that kind of stuff happening, and we began by asking ourselves, how can we use our experience with the Aphex Twin project to make connections like that and do collaborations like that, in a deeper, better, more exciting way.
Yeah. And,
So you mentioned that Valgir has done a lot of notated music. Is that the case with all of the groups that you're working with here? Is that the case? I can't imagine that guys that make the kind of music that Medeski, Martin, and Wood make are incapable of reading music. But
Right.
Is that something that they do on a regular basis? Are they as comfortable with that?
Right. So, and it's all very different. And even within Medeski, Martin, Wood, each member of the group has a different kind of relationship with notation. John Medeski is the most sort of, I think, notationally comfortable member of the band. And John studied composition, and he's the only member of the band who really, in a sort of straight ahead way, wrote us a piece. So the piece of John's that we did, while there is improvisation in it, and while it was still a collaborative process, John really wrote us a score in a fairly, straight ahead kind of way. Whereas the process with the other artists has been, more open. Billy, they all do read to some extent, but I think John likes to read more than maybe the others do. Billy, there were parts in pieces we did in the show in which Billy would read, and Chris also. But definitely, I think their preferred way to work is not from notation.
Mhm.
And the piece that we did, and Billy created us a piece which was much less notationally based. He actually also gave us a recording, which was sort of a jumping off point for something that our trumpet player, Jason Price, took the lead in creating, and which is a much more open-ended kind of improvisatory piece that was really created in the experience of working together. So that, whereas the John Medeski piece more existed on the page, the Billy Martin piece really was just a kind of chart on the page that then we really had to create in the workshopping process with Billy and the other Medeski, Martin, and Wood people.
So
And I would go ahead, Sam.
I'm curious. So, for instance, the Billy Martin piece, did that end up would each performance of it sound different, to
Yes.
a great extent?
To a pretty great extent, yeah. Billy's piece began with a piano improvisation. And Billy, Billy is Billy's like a sound guy. And you think about drummers and imagine that they're rhythm people. And obviously, Billy has an amazing sense of rhythm, but he's also and you see this in his drum playing too, he's really obsessed with sound. And the piece he wrote for us is really, it's actually, not at all what you'd expect of a drummer's piece. It's very, very pulseless or grooveless, and is very much a kind of sound and color exploration. And it started with a piano improvisation that he just did at home and recorded, and then added a second layer to. And he just kind of gave this to us, said, hey, what do you guys think what could we do with this? And working with Jason, our trumpet player, they came up with this vision where what had been the two very free parts that Billy had improvised on the piano became an organ part for John Medeski to play and a marimba part for one of our percussionists, Matt Smallcombe, to play. And everything else in the ensemble is like a resonance chamber. So the piece originally was done with the pedal down, and when we do it, they're the main voices, and everyone else is sustaining and echoing that and creating colors that come from that. So it's, it has a sort of, I don't know, barrio-like quality of where there's like these primary voices and then resonance around it. But there's a lot of improvisation that happens in that. So, there are all different kinds of things people do with those tones to give them color and life that is not at all on the page, and that, changes completely from each performance, responds to what else is happening, in the performance around them, really happens in the moment. And, we did 2 shows, and they were completely different, and, also very different in length. I think one was probably, 1.5 times as long as the other, and, they had very different shapes.
So the moral of the story is, listener, if this show is coming to your town for 3 nights, you should buy tickets to all 3 nights. So that notion is really interesting to me. I would think that Alarm Will Sound, as a group of concert musicians, is probably about as comfortable as any such group with that kind of improvisation. What's the balance like? What's the balance of the improvisation? It would seem like it would be very easy to kind of let Medeski, Martin, and Wood take the lead and everybody follow them. But I wonder what the nature of that collaboration was in practice.
Right. So there was a lot of improvisation both on Medeski, Martin. I mean, obviously they improvise a great deal, but there also was a lot of improvisation for Alarm Will Sound, and it's different in each piece. So Peyton McDonald, who was our percussionist, he left the group about a year ago and was one of the original generators of this idea. He wrote a piece for the project in which, and this was really, really nice, there were pairs of improvisers, one Medeski, Martin, and Wood person with one Alarm Will Sound person. So there was like a section where John Medeski improvised with our trumpet player, and there was a section where the 2 bass players, the Medeski, Martin, and Wood bass player and Alarm Will Sound's bass player improvised together, and a section where the 2 drummers, Billy from Medeski, Martin, and Wood, and then one of our players, Matt Smolcombe, improvised together. And then in the piece of Billy's that I was talking about, it was kind of a group improvisation, but in a very constrained way. So the notes were all specified. The improvisation is in things like timing and gesture, and are you going to do flutter tongue here? Are we going to crescendo here? Things like that. But the notes were all specified. So improvisation very much involved all of us, but was very different for each piece. And at no point is there like a crazy group improvisation where everybody just does anything. That certainly was not the kind of thing we were doing.
Was so John wrote a piece for like the closer, right?
Right.
Was it like constrained to the point that like one performance sounds pretty much like another performance, or does it have a lot of open-endedness?
That one was actually John's piece. Yeah, I mean, and kind of surprisingly, John's piece was really like all written out, and there were open sections in it for the Medeski, Martin, and Wood people to improvise, and a little bit where Caleb, our violinist and also in this project a guitar player, a little section where he improvised. But for the most part in John's piece, more so interestingly than kind of anything else in the show, it was really pretty much all written out, and John's piece, with open stuff in it, is pretty consistent from one performance to another.
Okay. So one of the things that one would hope would be an outfall from this kind of a project is that in the audience and the people who take an interest, you would bring, in the same way you're bringing some different types of musicians from different domains together, one would hope that the audience would have the same kind of commingling.
Right.
Do you have any sense for how that went? Were there like straight up, art music with a capital A people there, along with people who are just, as myself, MMW fanboys?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely. I mean, the MMW fanboys were pretty loud in the crowd, so we knew they were there. I think the straight up new music people were there, but probably a little quieter. But they were there. But yeah, it was a mixed crowd. And yeah, I mean, I think as the Aphex Twin project was too, the show endeavors to, and I think succeeds at being something that has audience, and also can show commonality between audiences. I think that the kind of audience that is into Medeski, Martin, and Wood, unless they're dead set on being at a jazz concert, is probably gonna dig a lot of what Alarmal Sound does too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got a question. I'm familiar with the two artists that we've talked about so far, and I've been trying to find out about Adult Fur, but I'm at work, and so I'm kind of being careful Googling.
Yeah, right. You never know where that might lead. Yeah.
But
Leave
I was
Safe
wondering,
Search on when you Google Adult Fur.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that project and how that's going as well.
So his other name, which is probably safer to Google, is Ryan McNeely, and he's based in St. Louis, and he's a singer-songwriter, does a lot of electronic stuff. He has a number of albums that are out, and we just really fell in love with his stuff. Alarmal Sound is doing a lot in St. Louis, so we've been working there and looking for cool artists there, and we checked out some of Ryan's albums and really liked them. And he's a young guy, and he had he has playing experience. Oh man, I believe it's violin. I think he played violin. He definitely has played. I think that's the instrument. He has a background. He does have a background. He knows how to read music. He's played an instrument. But definitely, it is not how he usually does his work. And like John Medeski, Ryan really wanted to take on the challenge of just writing out the piece on his own, which is not at all a requirement of the project. We're for most of the pieces that we've been doing through Alarm System so far, Alarmal Sound has done the actual notation work. But Ryan wanted to do it, which I really actually respected and appreciated. And so, but he, whereas John Medeski has some composition training and has had experience working with the notation software and writing scores, Ryan hadn't, and so this was really new for him. And so Ryan's been working with a couple of people in Alarmal Sound. Stefan Freund, who's our cello player and is also a very, very fine composer, has been sort of giving Ryan some composition guidance. And so Ryan works in Reason, which is a platform for doing electronic stuff, and he starts there, then brings it into Sibelius, and it's all very rough at first and looks like it looks like what it is, which is a sort of sequence, a transcription of a sequence. And then he brings that to Stefan, and they work on, okay, how do you orchestrate this? And it's one thing to start by saying, hey, I'd like to hear that particular line in the sequence on clarinet, but then that's the beginning of orchestration, and so they work together on that. And so Stefan and Ryan have been going back and forth a lot, and Ryan's also working with Courtney Orlando, who's one of our violin players, and who does a lot of copying and engraving work, and Courtney's helping him with the finer points of notation. Because the way something comes out of a sequencer program is not really what musicians want to look at on the page, exactly. And so details of articulation and just how do you make things, how do you notate things so that they convey what you want in a way that the player can read as quickly as possible. So Courtney's working with him on that, and then Chris Thompson, one of our percussionists, is working with him on the drum tracks. So all these collaborations are kind of happening at the same time, and then so for the May performance, which is when we'll premiere Ryan's piece, we'll have I think a really great piece out of Ryan.
A little bit of real-time follow-up. Ryan must be watching live because he tweeted at us @Adult Fur if you're watching, and make sure you spell that right and don't Google anything you don't mean to Google.
Right.
He writes, yes, violin, and I studied music in college for 3 semesters.
There you go.
That's his background.
Sorry, Ryan. I thought it was violin, but I wasn't totally sure and didn't want to get it wrong. Sorry.
We appreciate the follow-up. That's good.
Yeah, I don't know. I've found a pretty strong correlation. I've met so many electronic musicians who do violin as well. Miller Puckett being one of the iconic ones, right?
Who?
And Miller Puckett.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And yeah, so Ryan is among a good crowd, I think. Yeah.
So what was Sam asked earlier about the kind of the reaction from the crowd and the mix of the audience. What's the reaction been like from people who were there and heard this concert?
The Medeski Martin Wood concert.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean it's been fantastic. It was a really like we had 2 packed houses for it, and really like very very exciting audience response, and yeah, I mean it's amazing also just to see the way that the Medeski Martin Wood people really like. I mean they're amazing performers and amazing improvisers, and to see the way they like respond to the audience's energy. As they're improvising, both in that they played a set on their own, and then they played with us, and that relationship between like audience and performer, for in the world that they live in, and the kind of improvisation they do is really visceral. You really feel it, and that was a charge for us.
I wonder if, especially if you'd gotten to play a bunch of shows, but I've seen Medeski Martin Wood in concert several times, and it ranges from they play a tune and then another tune and then another tune that you recognize to they come out and they start improvising and you hear snatches of their music like a Barrios Sinfonietta version of their own catalog, right?
Right.
And anywhere in between that.
Right.
So did you feel like in the performances that you got to do, there was only 2, but including, I guess, rehearsals, did you feel that kind of like it could be anythingness, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, mostly, so the show opened with them doing a set on their own, and I would stand backstage for those sets and watch and listen, and yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to watch how like the ideas sort of gradually morph, Barrios Sinfonia, like as you were saying, and then out of something emerges like a song that people know. Yeah, that's really 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 cool to see. For the improvisation they did with us, it was all in a way constrained in that they were usually improvising within a kind of like set form. So there'd be like, it was like a part of John's piece and then a certain kind of improvising that they're doing. Or, the part in Peyton's piece where the 2 bass players, are going to improvise for like 24 bars. So in those, there wasn't the opportunity for that kind of stuff because it was basically the same sort of thing every night. But definitely, like there were moments when you would hear something be like, oh wow, that's really exciting, and you feel the energy is different each time they do it, even if it's in the same like general vein and shape.
Was there anything that you came up against when you were working on any of these collaborations that kind of surprised you, or that you learned something in particular from that you're going to apply to the other collaborations?
That's an interesting question. I
would think that there would be that you might, at least maybe this is just me projecting, but I would think that I would have some expectation that I would be very sure of, and I would go into this collaboration and be totally wrong about. Maybe you're just much better prepared for something like this than I am. Actually, let me restate that. You are definitely much better prepared for something like this than I am.
I mean, I think in general it's unfolded. I mean, the specific results have been, completely surprising. I mean, I guess one thing I can say along those lines is that I was surprised. One way in which my expectations were not realized is that I was surprised by the extent to which Billy Martin, who's the drummer from Medeski Martin Wood, really wrote a kind of like arrhythmic color study. And once he did that, it made sense because then it sort of changed how I hear his drumming. And after he did that, I then began to see in his drumming, it's sort of obvious that there is, he's constantly playing with color. And you look at like his percussion setup, and Billy Martin's setup for Medeski Martin Wood show looks more like a new music ensemble percussion setup than it does like your usual like jazz trap set. It's huge and filled with like unbelievable like variety of instruments, and like it's actually kind of hysterical. Like during like the set where like they're playing on their own, even when Billy's playing with us, like you just see him like dive down under the table and like come up with who knows what, and it's like some rattle from an African country, or it can be anything, and like the range bells, the range of stuff that he has is like apparently unending, and it's just you keep seeing this, like he dives down, he's gone for a second, and he comes back up, and there's like some other crazy noisemaker in his hand. He's doing something awesome with it.
It is very intentional. He's not just like rummaging around for the first thing he can touch.
No, I think he knows what he wants.
The sound that he wants.
Yeah, and so but initially my assumption was, of course, we were going to get like we're going to get some like drummy thing from Billy, and so it was interesting to see how much he didn't. That really like what Billy was excited about doing with us was creating this kind of exploration of color and harmony. But like that has changed how I look at his drumming and made me see things in his drumming that I didn't initially see. For John Medeski, I was really struck. I was surprised by how much. And I guess in a way this is true of Ryan too. Both Ryan and John were sort of and Ryan's piece is still very much in progress. Written sort of more new music-y things than I initially expected. I remember I looked at the first page of John Medeski's score and just thought, wow, this looks like nothing like what I expected a John Medeski piece to look like. There's nothing in this that sounds, remotely like jazz, or sounds like stuff I've heard from Medeski, Martin, and Wood albums. It looks like a piece of, kind of like crotchety avant-garde contemporary music. And then the piece went in lots of different directions, but it was very much like not the kind of beginning that I expected from John Medeski. So the artists have gone in surprising directions, but that's the idea. Part of what we're excited about in Alarm System is giving these like really creative, really smart artists, as all these guys are, an opportunity to do something that maybe they wouldn't do otherwise, and to explore a different side of their artistic personality.
And do you think they're doing that to like maybe accommodate you guys, or is that something that you think that is an expression that they've always wanted to play with, but have not had the opportunity to work with a group of chamber orchestra?
I sure hope it's the latter. I mean, the speech I always give to a new Alarm System artist is, we want you to do what you do. We're not looking for you to like make yourself into something else. For us, like we're coming to you because we really love the way you think, and we just want to we want to like open up the resources of Alarmable Sound to your imagination and your thinking. And I think I would hope that because we've done things like the Aphex Twin project, and we share that with people we're working with, that no one who's writing for us thinks that they have to write like Stockhausen or Warren to write us a piece. So I certainly, and we try really hard not to bring any predisposition to the table with regard to what they're going to write and what kind of music they're going to do. So I certainly hope, and I think that it is the latter option that you outlined, that it is that they're exploring some part of their musical imagination that maybe hasn't had a chance to be explored up till now.
Well, it's interesting to me that you describe it as this, trying to collaborate and have everybody contribute with what they do to make this new kind of thing that's a little bit of both sides, and then you get a body of work from them, and it's nothing like what you think of as their work.
Right.
And it's interesting that you said that it changed the way that you listened to Billy Martin's drumming. Have you had a similar experience with working with the other musicians as well, where the process of actually hashing this stuff out has caused you to listen to the rest of their stuff differently?
That's interesting. I can't think of another example. Well, I mean, one thing
Perhaps
that
Billy Martin was just a little bit more extreme than some of the others.
yeah, right. I mean, something that occurs to me a little bit along those lines is that we've been in the collaboration with Valgeir, who's the Icelandic producer that we've been working with on this. There's an incredible amount of detail in the score that he and Chris are creating. And at the same time, there's another project I've done with Valgeir, which is with Crash Ensemble, where Valgeir actually wrote a piece on his own for Crash Ensemble. And the notation there is much more, in a way, simple. There's less detail, and it's more sort of open. But seeing the kind of detail that, and we're actually, Crash Ensemble is recording that piece in not too long. Seeing the kind of detail that Valgeir, in collaboration with Chris Thompson, our percussionist, has created in the piece that Valgeir is doing for Alarm Will Sound with Alarm System, is sort of coloring how I think about, the kinds of things that Crash Ensemble might do with the piece that is more open, which Valgeir wrote for Crash Ensemble that we'll be recording in the spring.
So I think a very, very important question that we haven't gotten around to yet is, how can we get our hands on a recording of what you did with MMW?
Time. You have to wait.
There are plans to produce such a recording that people may purchase.
There are plans. We recorded both performances, and we recorded both dress rehearsals. And so the plan is, between those, basically, we have like 4 takes of everything to go through and put together a recording. But I don't know. I don't know anything more than that. I don't know when it would be out, or where, how much it would cost, or where to order it from. But eventually, I expect that recording will be there.
I knew it wouldn't be ready yet. I just wanted to make sure. And in case you didn't, this is my childish gimme.
I see.
gesture.
I see. That's huge. It's right in my face.
Yeah, well, I'm an AWS and an MMW, and I'm sure somebody else has pointed out that you guys both have the 3-letter acronyms.
That's true. I didn't think about that, so you were just in the middle of saying it, and then that occurred to me. Yeah.
I am an AWS and MMW fanboy, so
That's awesome.
super excited.
Have you figured out how to put the acronyms together yet?
No. They don't
Sam's
really...
going to be up all night writing acrostics.
That's right. So I'm curious about what plans, if any, you have for collaborations down the road in the Alarm System project.
Yeah, we're actually, we are just in the midst of putting out invitations for Alarm System 2.0 for the second year of Alarm System. I can't I can't say who they are yet, because we're still at the very beginning stages of talking to possible artists about doing it. But we expect there'll be another batch of 3 artists, and that it will unfold in a similar way, where there's some kind of collaboration between Alarm Will Sound and them, but that will take shape from the interests of the specific artists that we're working with. So hopefully, I expect we'll have an announcement about Alarm System Year 2 within a month or 2. So stay tuned.
Awesome. This is kind of backtracking maybe a little bit, but you're talking about the collaborative process with people who work in sort of broadly defined commercial music business, right? So
right.
They're making an electronically generated thing is sort of what they make. They don't make a score that's then played by whomever.
Right.
I was wondering if there has been any, or if you could envision a situation where, like, you've talked a lot about the collaboration working from them to you, such that you teach them how to generate a nice looking score, you teach them how to translate these sounds into acoustic instruments, etc. I wonder if there might be a space, or has there been any suggestion of this, where it works the opposite direction, such that maybe Alarm Will Sound generates stuff that becomes part of an electronic track, or creates a sample library from which somebody generates something, or something like that?
Yes, that is something that we've thought a lot about. And there are plans afoot for something very much along those lines. So yes, that is very much on our mind. And I should say that already it is more of a two-way street than sort of the simple version of how you outlined it just now, because with the exception of Ryan and John Medeski, no one else we work with this year is actually writing the score on their own. So for Valgier's piece, the score was really created by Chris Thompson, with then Valgier giving input. And for Billy Martin's piece, the score was generated by Jason Price. So and also lots of the music is really being created when we're all together in rehearsal. So with the Billy Martin piece, what was on the page was extremely basic, and really the piece was created by Billy being there with us and showing us and describing to us what it was that he was imagining.
Sort of being a producer, which is sort of what in commercial music business a composer is in a large way.
That's right. And and really the idea of the project at its core is that the artists should work the way they feel they are most comfortable with or most want to work. I had a really interesting conversation with Ryan at the beginning of his project, where I said that to him. I said, you should work how you're most comfortable working. And he actually turned that around. I thought this was really cool, and said, actually, I want to be uncomfortable. And part of why Ryan, even though it was certainly not something he had to do, why Ryan challenged himself to write a score on his own, is that he thought that the challenge and sort of discomfort of that would actually be really creative and really good for him. And I have a huge amount of respect for that. He's been working really hard both on his own and with Stefan and Courtney and Chris Thompson and Alarmable Sound to make that happen.
Well, that sounds a lot like the impetus that you would have had for starting a project like this yourself, right? Is that you want to try something that's a little bit uncomfortable, a little outside your normal sphere of expertise. Right,
totally. And it's also, it is in a way both more uncomfortable than, the usual, sign a contract, we'll get a score from you in 6 months kind of commission. But also more, more involving and more collaborative, because we are really part of creating this thing with the artists that we're working with. And so, whereas the sort of conventional commission process is in a way passive, you commission and then you stand back and you see what you get. With all of these projects, we are really involved with the artists and kind of creating with them the piece for Alarmable Sound. And so it's, we're really connected to what they're producing for us.
That kind of dovetails into, I've actually got a student composer question.
Yeah.
How often do you commission new works? I guess I would say, in a given year, how many pieces on average do you commission? Because you also produce works yourself, like the Aphex Twin things you guys did, right?
Right.
So
it's almost hard to count. I mean, really everything we do at this point is written for Alarmable Sound. We almost never play music that wasn't written for us. Mm-hmm. So pretty much everything we do is a commission. Some of them are arrangements. Some of them are new works. We have, a big source of commissions for us is the annual summer festival that we do, the Mizzou International Composers Festival, which is every July. And young composers are very much encouraged to apply. Every year we bring 8 young composers there. They've all been people that we've never worked with before, and they all write pieces for us. And we have a very intense period together, at the end of which we perform and record those 8 pieces. So that's 8 commissions every year, and then I would say on average we probably do. I guess Alarm System is another 3 commissions a year, and then probably there are 4 or 5 or so on top of that. But other than those, which are regular and annual, everything else is sort of irregular. We're just always developing new projects.
Do you get a lot of unsolicited scores from people who are really, really into Alarmable Sound?
Yes.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. But the truth is that we really, in a way, there's an easy answer for that, which is it's almost always no, unless there's some amazing reason why we have to do this piece, and it's just because really we do stuff that's written for us,
right?
And there are a few pieces out there like the Ligeti Chamber Concerto or the John Adams Chamber Symphony that come up in our repertoire despite not being written for us. But they're pretty few and far between at this point. I mean, really, at this point, basically the repertoire we do is alarm will sound repertoire.
And it really seems like almost most of what you do is like written with you or even half by you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's and it's not always true. But our experience has been they're like the more involvement that we have with the composer, the sort of deeper our connection to the piece in general. But there are also like Steve Reich went off and wrote us a really great piece, and we love playing that too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm also a huge Radiohead fanboy, and I've been trying hard to not get all super gleeful. But we talked about that on the show when it came out. Did you have any contact
I was talking about Radio Rewrite, we should
Yes,
say.
right.
Radio Rewrite, yes. Did you have any contact with any members of Radiohead regarding the project?
No. We were at a festival in Poland, the Sacrum Profanum Festival, when Johnny Greenwood was there too. And that's sort of when Steve met Johnny story. They connected at Sacrum Profanum, and we were there also. And that was where the kind of genesis of the piece came from. But Alarm Will Sound hasn't had any real contact with them. I mean, we've met them. I know Caleb Burhans, one of our violin players, was involved in that project where I forget the name of it now. Is it There Will Be Blood, the Johnny Greenwood film score? Was done. I know Caleb was involved in that. So there have been connection points, but no. But with Steve and Johnny had a real connection, and so they developed a relationship, and which culminated both in the Radio Rewrite piece, but then also in Johnny Greenwood playing Steve Reich's electric counterpoint on that same theme, which is I gotta say, an amazing performance. I mean, Johnny did a really fantastic, beautiful rendition of Steve Reich's electric counterpoint on that CD.
I think he did it in Max, Nate.
What?
I believe it. Yeah.
I think he uses this program Nate loves called Max MSP to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that's how he did it.
I mean,
it's gorgeous. I mean, it's really like.
Radiohead
I know that he obsessed over it. I know that he used. I forgot how many different guitars he used in it, but he used a ton of different guitars to create different layers for the piece. And he was. I know both anecdotally and also just from listening. I mean, he was incredibly obsessed with the detail of the layering of sound in that, and it is a really gorgeous and finely wrought recording.
Yeah. Well, is there anything coming up for you personally or for Alarm Will Sound other than the obvious things that we've been talking about? That this is the plug away section.
Yeah, stuff coming up. We're going to Korea next month, so we're all really excited about that. We are in the midst of working on a big opera project with a great Irish composer named Donncha Dennehy, whose music I love very deeply. He's writing an opera for us called The Hunger. I don't know if it's an opera or not. It's a theatrical piece with a couple voices. It's called The Hunger. It's on the uplifting topic of the Irish famine, and he's writing it for an Irish singer named Irla O'Leonard, who also sang Donncha's really brilliant Grog Boss piece, which Crash Ensemble premiered. And then there's a soprano part which was written for Dawn Upshaw. She got sick before the first performance and couldn't do it. I'm hoping she'll do it another time.
That's killer.
That was pretty. Yeah, she was very very upset about that. We were all really bummed out about that. So that's an upcoming project that we're very excited about. We have a couple recordings that'll be coming out soon-ish. Am I allowed to talk about this?
It's just you and
You're
it's just you and
director.
me.
You can say whatever you want.
And just us and Ryan and Sam's class, and
I'll say we have a couple recordings that'll be coming out hopefully in the next 5 or 6 months or so. We have 2 CDs that are in process.
They're recorded. They're just in post right now.
What?
They're just in post right now. You've got all the
Yeah.
tracks laid down. Great.
Yes. And then we're gearing up for, I've lost track, 6? I think it's 6, maybe 7th? Let's say 6. Summer at for the Mizzou International Composers Festival in Missouri. And really excited. We have our guest composers for this year are Andrew Norman, who's someone we've all admired for a long time, and Hans Abrahamsen, who's a brilliant, beautiful Danish composer. So we're really excited about working with both of them. Yeah, so always exciting stuff coming up. Oh, and also another commission that's coming to fruition really soon. Tyonde Braxton wrote us a piece called Fly-by-Wire that we premiered a couple years ago, which is a really great piece. Extremely hard. It's one of those pieces that took us like 3 or 4 performances to really get the feel of. It's a really bizarrely difficult piece. And Ty is expanding that. It's going to become a big 3-movement work. So we're premiering that sometime in the next year.
Well, that's great. And if people want to find out more about what Alarmal Sound has going on, you can go to alarmalsound.com. Is there any other ways that people can follow what you guys are up to, or what you personally are up to?
Usual social media: Facebook, Twitter, Google Plus.
Yeah, you're all over Google Plus.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a strong Google fan contingent in Alarmal Sound. So we keep that.
That's where the real nerds live.
Yes, that's where real nerds live. Absolutely.
Well, listen, Alan, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. This has been lots of fun. Anytime.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be keeping up with Alarm System and everything else you guys have going on. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Thanks.